So jumping away from artists, we're talking about content in the fandom. So what furries buy, what they look at. And compared to the online anime fandom, Acon, these anime fandoms we find, that furries don't buy a lot of videos. Lo and behold, there's not a lot of furry videos out there unless you consider things like Disney. Whereas in the anime fandom, you can go buy the entire Dragon Ball Z series on DVD. In terms of print media, we find that again, a fandom like the anime fandom seems to have a little bit more purchased print medium, things like manga, for example. Of the content that's purchased, so when furries and anime fans and sport fans do purchase content, we tend to find that furries buy content that's less likely to be violent. So anime tends to be more violent on average than furry content. I just report the numbers. We find that the furry fandom does report purchasing more pornographic material than the other fandoms. That's important to know that this is the midpoint of the scale. So it's not like all the content in the fandom is pornographic, but on average it tends to be more than the other fandoms.
I'm actually surprised that it's more than the anime.
Yeah. I just report the numbers. All right, put down. In terms of pornography, that is still my favorite picture. Anyway, pornography does exist in the fandom. About 96% of males in the fandom admitted to looking at pornography. This does not differ significantly from the general population. Only about 17% of furries say that the pornography they look at is exclusively furry. Compared to females in the fandom, where significantly fewer females view pornography in the fandom, and among those who do view pornography in the fandom, females are far less likely to view exclusively furry pornography. So females are much more likely, if they do use pornography, to use non-furry pornography. In terms of, we actually did some really cool data drudging using Fur Affinity metadata and found that about 25% of the content on Fur Affinity was tagged as mature or adult. So, what was interesting about this data is it suggested that when we talk to males and females about their attitudes towards pornography, males tend to be a little bit more positive in their attitudes about pornography in the fandom, while females were generally more ambivalent in their attitudes. So a lot more kind of, I can take it or leave it. Summarized quite nicely in this, I think.
For the porn. I heard the porn too. I heard Solo's got porn.
So as an aside, females in the fandom, we started looking at some of the issues that females encounter in the fandom in focus groups, and some of the things that women in the fandom sort of encounter when you consider the fact that the fandom is a predominantly male place. What are some of the issues that females feel in a predominantly male fandom? We found that females in the fandom tend to interact more with other females in the fandom. We found as well that about 81% of females recognize that the fandom seems to be kind of a boys' club. This is predominantly driven by the fact that about 84% of furries are male. So females are recognizing that this is that this feels like kind of a boys' club. And 19% of female furries said that they felt like they didn't belong. This sort of contributed to the fact that they feel like maybe this isn't a place that's super friendly for them because there are so many, because it looks like a boys' club, so maybe I feel like I don't belong. 52% of furries said that they were regularly reminded of the fact that they were female just by walking around and interacting with other furries. What this means is that at an average convention, female furries tend to kind of be reminded, either through comments or the way people treat them, they're reminded that they're female quite regularly. About 22% of women in the fandom say that they feel like they're looked down upon for being women in a predominantly male fandom. And 67% said they felt like they were kind of the opposite, put up on a pedestal by the fandom. That they were kind of treated like, oh, you are you're the one lone female in this group here. And it kind of put the spotlight on them. So shifting away from that, motivation. So we talked a little bit about pornography in the fandom. It's important to note that despite the fact that there's pornography in the fandom isn't defined by pornography. What I mean by this is that motivation to engage in the fandom for sexual reasons was below the midpoint. It was higher than the other groups, but sex isn't what draws furries to the fandom. Sex is just kind of, you have a naturally occurring sexual drive, If you're into cars, then you enjoy scantily clad women on the hood of a car. If you're into sports, then you enjoy cheerleaders. Yes?
So what you're suggesting to me, if I understand what you're saying,
I think I know where you're going.
18 to 25-year-old males are interested in sex?
Go figure. Give that man a PhD. Yeah, so what our research tends to suggest is that the fandom isn't the place that's creating sexual desires. 18 to 25-year-old males have a sexual interests, and if it's if they happen to be interested in anime, that's where their sexual interests lie. If they happen to be interested in walking, talking animals, then you put a pair of cat ears on it. And what you actually find is that a far bigger drive for the fandom has to do with things like belongingness. So furries tend to say that they're much more driven to the furry fandom by the fact that it's a place where they feel like for the first time in their lives, they can belong to a group of like-minded people. Furries say that they feel like they can belong to a fan community, and this is a bigger part of what it means to be a furry than it is for being a member of the anime fandom or being a member of the sport fandom. So furries are defined in part by the fact that we have this very close-knit community that people really like to belong to. Interestingly, on sort of this topic of relationships and friendships, we find that about 30% of straight furries and 80% of gay furries say that they found their partner through the fandom. So for many furries, this isn't just a place where you interact with your friends, but you may even find your significant other in this fandom. And of course, the biggest driving factor behind what makes a furry is the fact that it's fun. Being a furry is fun. We're here to have fun. So this is one of the driving factors. And you can see the kinds of things that furries tend to like to do at these conventions are fun things. Furries tend to sort of almost universally like things like science fiction, video games, cartoons, webcomics, artwork.
Outrage.
Most furries agree that we like, anime, mucks and role-playing, tabletop gaming. In fact, there was only one thing that furries tended to not like.
How did you know?
Believe it or not, there is actually a psychological nerdiness scale. And furries didn't score the highest on it in the groups. Convention-going anime fans tended to score higher, but all three of these groups were nerdier than sport fans. And these are the sport fans who like spreadsheets. So, furries did enjoy using computers. These are nerd stereotypes, and furries did score higher in computer use than the average, sort of more normal, mainstream fan group.
I wonder why.
Furries are more likely to play video games than the average mainstream fan group. And lo and behold, furries don't watch yeah, furries don't watch a lot of sports.
Wow, sport fans are likely to watch sports.
So you can see here that although sex is certainly a part of the fandom, it's there. It's not the driving force of the fandom, which is driven by things like community, arts, acceptance, conventions, local meetups, mugs, role plays, writing. These are the things that make up the furry fandom, and sex is really that thing that's kind of in the background. It's there, but it's not a defining feature of the fandom. I should just do the whole lecture just with pictures, really.
Yeah.
So one thing that we tried to do last year is to map sort of, do furries sort of, how do they see their trajectory in the fandom? Do they think they're getting more into furry? Do they think they're leaving the furry fandom? And what's interesting is that when you look at furries, regardless of how long they've been in the fandom, they kind of see this trajectory. I got into the fandom and then I'll stay here forever. No increase, no just, we're here and we're here forever. No increase, just done. And in actuality, what you find is that most furries predict that a year from now, they're going to stay about the same. Most furries are optimistic and say, I'm going to get even further into it. And there's only a relatively small number of furries who predict that they're actually going to be getting out of the fandom in the next year, or getting less and less involved as time goes on. What this suggests to us is that for a lot of times, furries, their exit from the fandom isn't something dramatic and I'm out of here, this is stupid. It's a very gradual fading away from the fandom. It may be a small, over time, gradual leaving the fandom or growing distant from the fandom, but it's not necessarily punctuated or defined by this really sharp, I'm out of here, this is stupid. And we're wanting to do much more research on this going forward, so we're actually trying to find ways to catch furries as they're leaving the fandom to see, well, why are furries predominantly a young group of folk? Where are the 30-year-old furries, the 40-year-old furries? Hi, Istanbul. In terms of issues sort of plaguing the fandom, so we asked furries to talk about some of the controversial issues that were discussed on furry forums, the kinds of things that furries talked about or debated about in the fandom, which is kind of, it makes sense given that we're such a diverse group of people who won't always agree on everything. So 71% of furries said that the fandom was getting better over time, or about 4% said it was getting worse. So most furries tend to believe the fandom is either staying as it is or getting better. About 40% of the fandom said that the fandom was too sexual. About 12% said that it wasn't inclusive enough of other groups. 33% said that there were groups that they wished weren't in the fandom. Don't start yelling out these groups. I know some of you are going to do it. What issues exist in the fandom? When we asked furries what kinds of issues are the hot button issues, they talked about things like bad media portrayals, or media portrayals of furries that said, hey, it's a fetish. So these inaccurate media portrayals. The other big thing that came up with things like drama or felt social awkwardness, and bigotry and bullying. Yeah. Do you have a question, or are you just really excited?
Well, it just reminded me about that. There was a furry convention that went on like a couple months ago, and somebody gassed the hotel because it was a furry convention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was contacted by the media to speak about that.
Boring con.
Terrorist attacks aren't a defining feature of the furry fandom either. That's really low on that scale.